Black Knowledge Matters session. Here we have a great guest today, Brother Damani Sukumu, and he's going to be talking about understanding cultural imperialism and the culture crisis. And Brother Damani has been with WOSE since 1994. He's one of our he's one of our great fundraisers. In terms of economics, Brother Damani is with us 100%. He's helped a lot of people in the community along the way. And for those of you that don't know, he's one hell of a chess player. So
my brother's a little better.
Is he? Harold, you're better?
Yeah, we haven't played in a while, so he may have improved his game.
The Galaxy X10 is his sister Yvonne.
Okay, that's my sister Yvonne.
Sister Yvonne, my goodness, good to have you to join us today. I'm going to put that in, and then we're going to start. All right.
I'm technically challenged, so it took me a while to figure out how to unmute.
Okay, well, we got you in here now. Well, I'm glad that you're on. We're all in varying degrees of ignorance. There's one more person that's texting me that's trying to get in, and so I just need to type something.
I'd just like to make one comment, and that's neither one of them have played me yet.
Hey, real fast, Milford, could you text your sister I think it's Donna or Sharon, the meeting ID and password?
I did. I sent it to him already. I actually spoke with Donna today and asked her if she had received it. She said she didn't, but I sent it to her.
Okay.
Hey, you know, everybody's bragging about how good they are with chess. Maybe we should have a tournament.
Maybe we should. That's pretty difficult on Zoom. I'll just say that. All right. Hey, let's start again. It's 5:09. Glad everybody could join us here in the Black Knowledge Matters. Serious things that are going on today, and we have a serious brother that is going to be talking about that, and that's Brother Damani Sukumu, Understanding Cultural Imperialism and the Culture Crisis. A long time a member of WOSE, going back to 1994. He's one of our serious fundraisers and for economic development here in Sacramento. Very loving and caring person. I've seen that personally, reaching out to various members, a very conscientious brother, and I'm glad that he could join us today. And so he's feeling a little anxious about his abilities on Zoom, but I'm sure he's going to be fine. And so he has the ability to share his screen. And so, Brother Damani, whenever you'd like to begin, the floor is yours. And thank you for coming.
Okay. So share my screen. Can y'all see my screen?
No, blank, no picture.
Oh, here we go. We got it.
That's good. Okay.
It's coming up.
All right. My brother wanted me to start off with a joke, but I ain't got time. I just like to direct this to my brother. Do I look like a freaking comedian? We'll laugh about that later. Okay, the topic, I got a very interesting subject today. I'm very passionate about this subject. The inspiration for this subject, culture imperialism and the culture crisis, it comes from Dr. Esther G. Hillard and Dr. Marimba Ani. Two of these master teachers really inspired me to talk about culture. So we're running late, so I'm gonna get started on the next slide. Okay, let me see, how do I just go, okay. Okay, the reason for choosing this subject was Dr. Esther J. Hillard on his deathbed told Dr. Smalls and Dr. Jeffries, and they told us when they was in Sacramento with AABH, tell the people they must win the culture war. And it's Dr. Hillard on his deathbed, still fighting for the people. Culture war is a struggle between groups for the dominance of their values, beliefs, priorities, etc. It carries militaristic overtones and struggle for power and hegemony. Now, culture is always about values, beliefs, priorities. What's going to be the dominant values and beliefs in the culture? Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Okay, Dr. Marimba Ani is an African-centered culture scientist. She's also an anthropologist, an African-centered anthropologist. She's the author of the book Yurugu, and the reconstruction of a revolutionary African culture is her task. Both of these master teachers, Dr. Ani and Dr. Hillett, have their finger on the pulse of the problem. Both of them, to me, have their finger on the pulse of the problem, which is culture. And this presentation should make it crystal clear what I'm talking about. Dr. Hillett points out that we don't have a political crisis, nor an economic crisis. We have a culture crisis. Let me back up. 3 takeaways I want, what I'm trying to get across and trying to emphasize on this presentation is the purpose. Everybody understand, I know most of you, I'm talking to the choir, a lot of you, the purpose and the function of culture. Understand the purpose and the function of culture. And having it's very important, I think, that we all have a coherent and cohesive understanding of culture and be able to recognize the weaponization of culture. I'm gonna have a slide talking about the weaponization of culture. And that's it. Okay. And so, okay, I chose the reason for choosing this subject. Let me see, let's go on. Okay, Dr. Marimba Ani, this is her definition of culture imperialism I like to use from her book, Yurugu. Culture imperialism is a systematic imposition of an alien culture in an attempt to destroy the will is thoughts and actions of a politically dominated people. The mechanisms of culture imperialism causes cultural insecurity, and self-doubt. Somebody got the somebody need to put their computer on mute. I got heard background noise. The mechanisms of culture imperialism causes culture insecurity and self-doubt within the dominated group. Separated from their ancestral legacy, they lose access to the source of their political resistance.
Imhotep, the ladies that you put their name in, they're the one that's not muted.
Okay, everybody muted now. Okay, an attempt to destroy the will of a politically dominated people. And to me, that was that when that officer had his knee on on George Floyd's neck, it was all about breaking of the will. It was all about breaking of the will of George Floyd, breaking the will of Black people. And so you down here, it says, separated from our ancestral legacy, they lose access to the source of their political resistance. As you can see that as we learn our history and our culture, you cannot oppress a historically conscious people. That's what John Henry Clark learned when he went and talked to Arthur Schomburg. Okay, next slide, then I'm gonna show a video. This slide here is the function and purpose of culture, I get from Dr. Marimba Ani. This is very important. Dr. Ani and Dr. Hillett, both of they're like warriors on the battlefield fighting their enemy from different perspectives. Their definitions and their idea of culture, meaning of cultures intersects. But anyway, culture carries rules for thinking. Culture, short definition of culture I got from Dr. Ray Higgins is concepts and influences that directs the collective behavior of a people. Remember, culture carries rules for thinking. Culture gives us a design for living, patterns for interpreting reality. Culture is where life takes on meaning. Culture unifies us. It gives us order. Culture is an instrument for making cooperation natural. Culture identifies us, gives a sense of identity. If we are centered in our culture, we know we are at war. If we're not centered in our culture, we don't know how to behave. Culture commits us, gives us commitment, near, purpose. Culture is political, is ideological. Culture is not peripheral, something you do on the side in museums, at events, at festivals, or during Kwanzaa once a year. Culture and worldview is intimately related. And this is key, I want y'all to hear this. Culture and worldview is intimately related. Africans perceive the world as a unified spiritual whole. Focuses on spirit, the God within, versus the European concept. Their worldview is we're individual beings. We're rational beings. We're disconnected from each other. Europeans have a linear conception of reality. They focus on materialism and the God outside of them. We focus on the God within, on spirit within. They focus on the God outside of them. And their worldview, as you can see, creates selfishness, greed. It creates chaos we see in the culture right now. And so Dr. Ani goes on to say, we must constantly, this is key, we must constantly construct an African-centered paradigm that's modeled for our thinking and move it up to a conscious level. We've been using an Eurocentric paradigm without realizing that's what we've been doing. She said we must move it up to a conscious level because you cannot analyze anything critically without a frame of reference. Our worldview is our frame of reference. Our worldview, our culture is our frame of reference, right? You can easily talk to somebody and can tell they have disconnected thought. They have are they coming from an individualistic point of perspective, or they have a linear perception of reality. You can pick up that quickly when you move our worldview to a conscious level. She said we've been using the Eurocentric paradigm without realizing that's what we've been doing. Okay, Minister Imhotep, can you go ahead and show the first video? And after this, we can have a little discussion, y'all want to. The first video is Dr. Marimba Ane, 8 minutes and 22 seconds.
If you told black people that white people were committing biological genocide against us and that by the year 2000 whatever there would be no more black people, you would get one reaction. But you're saying that we're being threatened with cultural and psychological extinction. How do you get African people to see the urgency of this situation?
I don't know, frankly, if you can. I think that we have to focus on young people, young African people who have not been so conditioned with a way of thinking that supports European imperialism, European power, that they still have the ability to use their intuition, their spirituality, their Africanness to create, to think beyond the limitations that have been given to them in European academies. I think most of us as adults, as elders, have been so conditioned that we're afraid to move beyond the parameters that have been defined by our enemies in our thinking, so that our vision is limited. And so we are really not the people who should be conceptualizing the plans, the movements, what we should be building. But I focus on the younger people who hopefully are still more in touch with what is natural to African people. And if I can affirm that in them, they will see the urgency. I find that in my teaching. I find that in teaching young people, that once they are affirmed and introduced in a conscious way to the African worldview, it becomes crystal clear to them. And they see in an urgency in us as African people building for self, as opposed to imitating forms which have been put in place to make sure that we continue to be oppressed.
Culturally and psychologically, do you think we realize what we have lost?
No, not. It's ironic because we don't realize it on a conscious level. Yet we live it every day in the way we walk, in the way we talk, in the way in the music we create. There is a depth of spirituality which exists in us as a people, which has continued since our origins, that our ancestors have passed to us, and which we continue to pass on ourselves, that we don't consciously recognize as a strength. We don't realize that it is something that we need to use to think with, so that when we are presented with a European worldview in the classroom, we think that that's the only way to be. That's the only way to think, because we didn't come with anything. So I don't think that we are aware on a conscious level of what it is that we've moved away from in terms of power. You see, that's what we're not aware of.
Could you talk some about how we came to be who and what we are today? If you understand the question.
I think I do.
Okay.
I think that we have to look back at a period that I call the Ma'afa. We as Africans were very consciously stripped of our culture. Now, that becomes a platitude. Everybody's saying that. Stripped of our culture, but we have to see that we had a strong culture and so forth. But nobody seems to realize the depth of what that means. Being stripped of our culture meant being conditioned to accept ourselves as inferior beings, okay? It meant that we were conditioned to feel that we had to be dependent on Europeans, dependent on white people, that we could not do things for ourselves and in our own image. That conditioning began with a long period of terrorism, which was very physical, physically manifested. At the same time, there was the breaking of the will. So there was cultural violence, I call it, in the book, as well as the physical violence, which was very important. We then came to a period in which we mistakenly thought we were free. We're now at a point where we think that we have freedom, the ability to be whatever it is that we can be within this society and so forth. Yet what happens is that we are still thinking within a modality that has been determined by those who would oppress us, those who would control us. And we don't see beyond that. So the question for me becomes, who controls how you think? We have the ability to create our own structures, our own theories, our own definitions of reality, to look at the African worldview, to look at, for instance, the Dogon people, to look at the Kemetic people, to look at our own people who have, to even look at Carter G. Woodson, for instance, the miseducation of the Negro, which I don't think was really ever understood by us. And to use these things as inspirations for the building of institutions, the creation of things, the building our own buildings. We have the ability to do that. So it's almost like we've been conditioned so well through such a long process that now it is us who are enslaving ourselves mentally.
Because the job has already been.
The job has been done. It would be so easy, in one sense, for us to undo it. That's what I'm saying in this book. Because the way the system of European control works is that you have to accept a concept of reality which makes them superior.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Y'all want to? Anybody have any discussion? Anything they want to say?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
As we talk about reparation and what have you, my thing would be that if we did get reparation, what we do is pay all these young Black children to go to Black independent schools, but make sure that the money is accountable. In other words, don't just have them sitting up schools just to make money, but sit up schools like our Ile Omide that really will teach the kids who they are. Because based on what she's saying, that's the problem. See, me growing up in the South in Alabama, and when before we got integrated, we had Black teachers that insist that we learn, because we recognize in the South that the reason the masters didn't want you to learn how to read and write because you would become independent. And you can see that throughout now. That is what's wrong with our children now, because they're so brainwashed that they feel that there's no end, so they run around shooting and killing one another, based on 1967 when they put the drugs in the community. The drugs was to either get them hooked on it or get them in jail, and either way, they're out of the system. And so what I would like to see that reparation come through, that while we pay young Black kids to go to school, that's a program that would probably work, because most of them, they don't have a job, they don't qualify for anything. But if we paid them to go to these Black independent schools, then they will learn who they are, and they would live a much better life, and they wouldn't be so quick to empty a gun in one another, because you can see how they shoot one another. It's self-hatred. They hate themselves. So when they shoot one another, they don't shoot one time. They will empty the gun in, because what they're trying to do is kill their own self because of self-hatred. That's why I would like to see, the reparation money come into being, that where it will set up these Black independent schools and make sure, in other words, first of all, we got to get a brain trust together that will sit down and sit these schools up so that they would teach the correct thing. Because we got Black scholars now that come out of this that came out of the 60s and in these Black Studies program, they understand now. They can come in and begin to teach the teachers what they need to teach and set up a curriculum for these Black independent schools so that they would be able to turn out these Black kids so that they would stop, they would know who they are and they wouldn't be so quick to shoot one another. Because what would happen, it would help stimulate their culture. They would realize that they come out of a very rich culture of nothing but love and that we are the children of the sun. You see what I'm saying? That's what I would like to see come out of it. That's what I would like to see us begin to move on, because we have got to be able to get to these young folks. And the reason I say that, I was in, for the last 20 some years, I was in a group they call Simba, African-American men teaching African-American boys how to become men. Not that a sister can't teach them how to be independent, but a man have to teach them how to become a man. And since then, like I said, you know, I've put about 20 years into that. And some of the boys that I've met with now, they have graduated and they got families, and they still call me up and talk to me just like I'm their father, because they could get in touch with me 24/7. That's what I would like to see reparation to do so that we can get on the right track. Because based on what the sister's saying, that's exactly what I think. That's my thinking, is that we need independent schools, because as long as they go into these Ivy League schools, they're going to think like white folks. And white folks will accept them into their midst. But when you become independent, you don't have to feel you're accepted, because you're going to be accepted by your own people. I have sit down working at the hospital. One of the things that we were sitting down talking about, you know, with the Jews and what have you, they can understand why we were so docile. Why didn't we, you know, coming out of slavery, why didn't we do something about educating? They were telling me that once they came out from under Hitler, they would go to the public school, but when they came home, they went down in the basement to a independent school that taught them, because they said never again. And that was one reason why they did not want to have quotas, because they said, you got to remember that we're controlling just about all of the law schools and we're writing the books. But if we start coming up with quotas, that would cut us down. See, in their philosophy was not to own the schools, but to control it. And that's exactly what they do now. Look how they're in Congress and everything now. But they're solid in their culture. You see, and that's what have to happen to us as a people, that go right now, we willy-nilly all over the place. If we hang out with the Jews, we act like them. We hang out with the Germans, we act like them. Whoever we hang out with, we adopt their culture and never our own. Because why? We don't understand our own. It's not taught in the public school.
Right. But
anyway, I don't want to take up all the time. So,
but Dr. Hill is we're gonna talk about the socialization process in a minute. Yes. Yeah, I agree with you, brother Kofi. Hey, brother Baba Kofi Annan, that's his son is Professor Manub Ampin.
That's correct.
That's right.
Okay. And like I said, he's one of the things that I taught, that each generation have to become stronger. I'm going to teach you what I know, and what you learn on your own, you're going to seek out mentors to make sure you move to the next level, because you can't remain the same as I am. I went to school so I could get a job, so I could put them through school. But I taught them, not only do you go to school, but you go to school, whatever subject you take, make sure you can make it work for yourself. And that's why right now, the boys that I'm independent, that I taught, and my grandchildren that I taught now, they've not only did they go to school, but they have started their own business so that they can become independent. That's the whole idea of having an independent school, teaching about independence, so that you know who you are, not just to get a job. We need to recognize that, take the subject. If you take a subject, make sure you can make it work for yourself so you can earn your own living.
All right.
Brother Damani,
yes, sir.
May I speak?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to introduce someone that you actually introduced me to, and that's Dr. Amos Wilson. And what Dr. Amos Wilson says about culture is that culture is what we use to solve problems. You know, I think a lot of times we mistake the trappings of culture with the actual culture itself. So, you know, the dress, the hairstyles, or whatever. But we need to examine what problems as African people we need to solve, and that is part and parcel of our culture. I mean, we have a historical, cultural identity that we need to reconnect with. But right now, 2021, there are some things that we need to solve, and that becomes our culture. So we need, you know, we need to solve the problem of our young people, men and women, young men and young women relating to each other, because a lot of times our young people are so confused. They're confused on their sexuality. You know, just the basics. And these are the things that will over time eliminate us from the scene. If we're confused on that, then we'll have problems. So I'm just throwing that out.
You have to also remember, Mr. Imhotep, that most right.
You went back on mute. Okay, there you go.
Most cultures has a rite of passage. That's what we need, a rite of passage, so that African American men can teach African American boys how to become men and how to love themselves. And that way we don't get all confused. But we don't have, we about the only group that doesn't have a rite of passage.
Well, the other thing too, and I don't want to dominate the discussion, just me and you, is that we don't see, part of that rites of passage is how we as Black men relate to Black women. And part of the rite of passage for Black women is how they relate to Black men. And I think that that's a very important thing that we tend to bypass. We kind of just let it go. But it's very important in this time of confusion as to what is what a man is, what a woman is, etc.
And that's also why the Sisters of Tomorrow was so important. Because I used to interact my boys with Pam boys, with Pam girls, so that they would understand. And I used to tell them all the time, please don't go in there and tell them girls how fine they are. If you do, they're gonna rip your heart out. You know, but it worked. You know, they used to go skating together, camping together, all that kind of stuff. You know, but that's very important. They got to have a right of passage so they'll know when they become men.
There's another factor. I think there's another factor we need to consider, and is one that has the potential and the ability to undermine so much of the good and positive work that might be going on in other aspects of our lives, and that is the media, especially televisions and movies. They're using a technique now known as subliminal messaging. And what it does is it drives the subconscious mind and thinking. And we're seeing this being played out most vividly right now before our eyes. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen the television commercials and shows move increasingly towards pairing Black women with white men, pushing Black women out as the heroes and as the leaders, and also through the music, again, which the TV is the vehicle. What goes on that movie screen all the time is not some of the best music and videos that are out there, but some producer, some director behind the scenes is determining what is going to go out there and what is going to sell, and that's what they push. And so we see a lot of gender confused young Black people, and we see a lot of the debasement of themselves and the way that they utilize their bodies, and and that is sold as something that is good, something that is your individual right to do what you want. But this undermines the culture works of a struggling people, of a people trying to get up off their knees. You still have all these counterbalance of forces of retribution coming down on us, and in subtle ways that most of us just don't even realize.
Yeah, that's you're right, Kaiser. When I took my class, hang on.
mechanisms of culture, culture, imperialism.
Yeah. When I took my class on videography, the first paragraph when I first started reading, when I opened the book, was about the psychological effect that videography was going to have on that. They was telling me that I was going into a class, not a mind control class. So whatever you begin to put on video and on television, that's the way you control people's minds. So you're right on with it.
It's very powerful.
The first paragraph talked about mind control.
Yeah.
Okay.
And our people, Black people,
Damani,
watch a lot of
can I
TV
add
and go to a
something?
lot of movies.
Damani, may I
Yes,
add
go
to
ahead.
what I like to say is when you focus on the young African people, perhaps we can teach them to spend money in the Black community to support Black-owned businesses. The businesses that's going to put money back in our neighborhoods, our community.
Right, I agree.
I think that would be a nice start, because the older people, they're going to still go spending money at these department stores or whatever. But if we can focus on the young kids to support, try to support the Black businesses, and hopefully the Black businesses are doing their A game, because sometimes you can go to some Black businesses and they overcharge you, and they got a bad attitude. So we got a lot to work on. If you're going to be in the business, be professional. And
right.
And so it's important to teach these kids to support Black businesses, the ones that's going to put money back into your community.
I agree.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
My name is Sharon.
Okay, after Sharon, I need to move on to this presentation. Okay, go ahead, Sharon.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I just want to add that I think that we as a people should consider depositing our money, if not all, but some, into Black banks. And those Black banks are community-based. And through those Black banks, we will be able to teach our children how to save their money, different financial instruments that they can use.
Finance everything we need to finance. Yeah.
Exactly. And one other thing, because of the police brutality that the whole country has been experiencing, I think we should go back and take care of our own communities. And maybe it needs to be a partnership between police and community members. Those community members know who lives in the neighborhood. And they would be more than likely to be able to de-escalate a situation because they are trusting that person that's talking to them. We should have social workers in those communities, mediators in those communities. And it's not like us Black people don't have these positions already in place. They are. We just need to bring them together with a plan and do it. Thank you.
Okay, let me, thanks, cuz. That's my cousin Sharon. And let me move on through, let me read some of these slides I got here. This is Dr. Esther J. Hillard III. He's a master teacher, was an educational psychologist, sociologist, historian, chematologist. He was a curriculum developer, a curriculum evaluator. He was on the lawsuit in California, helped California to get rid of the racist IQ testing. So Dr. Esther J. Hillard, master teacher, something else. My sister Yvonne introduced me to a show called For the People. And the first scholar I met was Dr. Hillard. And he freed my mind. It was a free your mind lecture. Anyway, Dr. Esther J. Hillard, some of his views on culture. People of African descent in the US can only be understood when both the African culture and Western hemispheric political realities are taken into account. Together, for example, 400 years slave trade, colonization, racism, highly sophisticated strategies of oppression have been massive political and economic forces operating on African people. These forces have affected the culture, the socialization process, and the very consciousness of African people. Let me go on to the next slide. Remember that socialization process, Dr. I got a book around here. I meant to bring it. The Maroons With Us is a book. It's 25 essays by Dr. Hillard called The Maroon Within Us. And he's talking about this socialization process. The book is written for, the book is written for those of us who are conscious about restoring our culture. We're conscious about the things we've been talking about, building our own schools and building our own everything. Let me move on. Dr. Hilliard's views on culture continue. Dr. Hilliard, it's a people's culture. Their shared creativities and struggles, if they have evolved over time, that defines their essence. Culture is the personality of a people, their unique way of being in the world. Culture is the tie that binds. Culture brings everything together. If there's no shared culture, there's no group, no unity, no solidarity. Either you belong to a people or you don't. The engine of group oppression is always culture genocide. Freedom from oppression isn't enough for African Americans. This is a key. Purpose and direction comes from immersion in a culture base. The role of, this is a quote by Cabral, Emile Cabral. The role of colonial education, home and abroad, was to separate us from our history and traditions, our culture. That's why Brother Kofi said we got to get our own schools everywhere, like we got at the Iliome Day. Let me move on to, let me read through a couple slides. This Dr. Hillard on education and community socialization. There are parts of our task that can only be addressed by the African community itself. That's when Brother Kofi said he took those Jewish kids down in the basement. After they come from the school, he took them in the basement and you taught them what they need to know about our culture. Schooling refers to common content, skills, attitudes, understanding required by the larger society. Remember, Dr. Hill is an educational psychologist now. He's a bad dude. Socialization, education refers to a deeper level of understanding that enables the learner to interpret the realities around them. Socialization, which we got to work on, refers to the process of assuming responsibility for one's ethnic group based upon the teachings of a shared culture and destiny. Community socialization is a prerequisite for unity and solidarity. Before we have Umoja and before we can have NIA, we need some community socialization. It's essential. It will permit us to collectively improve the conditions of our people. Remember, we come from a people of socialization. We come from a people who were socialized to, they were socialized to take on responsibility of protecting the culture, of growing the culture, of leading the culture, They were socialized to accept responsibility for the ethnic group, not to become individual beings. Let me move on to a couple more slides. I'm gonna come back to Dr. Hillard, his video. It's a weaponization of culture. Europe's political success can be accredited not so much to its superior military might as to the weapon of culture. The former required a standing army. The latter, which is culture, guaranteed long-lasting dominance. What he's talking about, the Roman armies in their conquest of most of the world, they soon found out that if you can dominate a people's culture, it was a far more effective tool than a standing army. Dr. Kaba Kamene, in his first few minutes on the documentary Out of Africa, points out, if you take away a people's language, history, and psychological profile, which is their VIP, this is the culture war we're in, values, interests, and principles, and replace them with your language, your history, and your VIP, your psychological profile, wherever they go on this planet, they'll be conditioned to act in the interest of the colonizer. So what she's talking about, imperialism was an aggressive thrust. Imperialism was an aggressive thrust into our culture, into our mind, into our space. Real fast, imperialism is it deals with finance too. Lenin in 1917 wrote a book on imperialism. It was the highest stage or the final stage of capitalism. Imperialism deals with consolidated corporate finance combined with other forms of power like military power and institutional power with the US. And so they went around the world with this imperialist attitude using all forms of power. Dr. Hilliard, physical enslavement was dependent on mental enslavement. Erase African memory. Number one, erase African memory. 2, suppress African culture. 3, teach white supremacy. 4, control culture institutions of socialization. 5, control education. Control wealth, physical segregation. He said he's going to show this in this video I'm going to show of Dr. Hilliard. The first 3 are forms of psychological warfare. You erase African memory. He's going to point out when a people loses its historical memory, they are disabled. When the people have no historical memory, they are disabled. And that was one of the purposes of imperialism, to erase our memory of our history, of our culture, our way of life. Okay, Minister Imhotep, you want to go ahead and show that video of Dr. Hilliard? It's 10 minutes and 43 seconds long, yo.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And then after that, we can have 10 minutes of discussion.
Hello, I'm Lister Velt Middleton. We are very glad to have you with us. At the beginning of this century, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois predicted that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And color, the glorification of one and denigration of another or others, continues to play a dominant role in determining how power is distributed. But what are the tools that have been used and are being used to maintain black-white power relationships? And how are words and images being used to control thought and action among people of African descent in the United States and around the globe? When and how does an African become a Negro? How was the myth of white superiority created in the modern world, and how was it projected back in time? So-called Western education for black children, poison or medicine, the origins of humanity, the beginnings of civilization, royal African images in ancient Egypt, and Africa's gift to Europe. Just some of the topics we'll explore with Dr. Asa G. Hilliard III, the Fuller E. Calloway Professor of Urban Education at Georgia State University. Dr. Hilliard is the former Dean of the School of Education at San Francisco State University. A highly respected educational psychologist, Dr. Hilliard was involved with the court case that outlawed IQ testing for black children in California. Dr. Hilliard recovered with Julian Richardson, George G.M. James' seminal work, Stolen Legacy, the African Origin of Greek Philosophy. Dr. Hilliard, what does it mean to be black in America from a psycho-historical perspective?
It's important for blacks in America to know history. That history includes the history of enslavement in Africa, of colonization, later of segregation in the United States. My own studies as a psychologist of the uses of history have shown that this enslavement had more than one part to it. There was the physical enslavement, but the only way that physical enslavement would work is that the mind also had to be enslaved. And there were a series of processes that I call the dynamics of domination. These processes go something like this, that in order for one group of people, in this case Europeans, to control an African population, it was necessary first to erase African memory. Secondly, to suppress the practice of African culture. Third, to teach white supremacy. Fourth, to control the institution of socialization, to prevent African people from educating their own children, from sending their own messages and so forth through media and what have you, the control of wealth, and finally physical segregation. These are the historical activities that Europeans engaged in order to conquer the continent, to enslave people, to practice segregation. And of course, if you look closely at that list, you'll notice that the first few things on the list are really psychological. For example, to destroy memory or to suppress or erase memory is a psychological operation which disables anyone as an individual who had no memory.
Now, when you say memory, you're talking about personal memory or what?
I mean the memory of one's group history in particular. Personal memory would be important if we're talking about your own psychological individual adaptation. But you can use the same thinking to apply to a group. When a group loses its historical memory, it is disabled as a result. So these were some of the very calculated and conscious tactics that were applied that resulted in the disabling of the African population. So history, identity, the teaching of belief in white supremacy, each of these is a psychological process that was practiced, and we need to understand that in part by going back and examining the historical record. And having understood it, it's possible to gain control over those things that control us.
What do you mean by de-Africanization? How did that process work?
Well, of course, that leads right out of what we were just talking about, that the erasing of memory, the teaching of white supremacy, and so forth, can place an African population in a position where it begins to reject its own image of itself, its own memory of itself, its own history, becomes less African in conscious behavior, although it's very hard to become, if you're truly of African origin, it's very hard for that behavior to disappear. But it's easier for the consciousness of that behavior to disappear. And so over a period of time, figure the centuries that African populations have been in America, it's possible that the population merely American, each of these is a step or an indication that there is some loss of conscious contact with one's true identity.
You have talked about the neuroses, I guess that's the word maybe, among the European population during this enslaving period. Would you address that, please?
Right. Well, if you operate a system of domination, a formal system of domination, by those rules that I talk about, you have to confront the truth. And the only way that you can be consistent in applying those rules is ultimately to bend the truth. And after a while, it results in an adaptive process that we call racism, which is really a mental disorder. It's a disorder in the mental sense because it follows the rules of mental disorder. For example, manifestations of racist behavior as a result of domination are the denial of reality, perceptual distortion, delusions of grandeur, phobias in the face of differences, and projecting blame, blaming the victim.
Explain those, please.
Well, each of these are ways that I guess you call them adjustment or adaptive mechanisms. For example, if you take Africa as it really existed, and you attempt to subjugate Africa as Europeans did, it couldn't work if you're subjugating another human being. So that human being had to be changed mentally into something else. It had to be changed into a subhuman or an animal or anything else. But you could not operate and be consistent with yourself. So it required a change in one's mind, which meant that the Europeans had to begin to lie to themselves about what Africa was and had been. And in the process of keeping that misinformation going, then one adapts to unreality. So when you see reality, it's necessary to deny reality. So denial of reality would be an example of that, would be to look at the population of Egypt, which was a black population, and to say it was a white population. That's a flat-out denial of what the facts say, and that, of course, has been typical throughout history. Perceptual distortion is just simply not getting a clear view of what is really true, even while looking at the truth. Teaching of white supremacy means the belief in the supremacy of white people, or it could be anyone who would follow the rules of oppression. If one decided that their own group was superior to all other groups, that would be an example of what I call a Napoleonic complex, because it is not true that the white group is superior to anyone else, but the belief in that would be a psychological distortion of reality, and in that sense would be following the rules for oppression.
Okay, as we get ready to go to the first slide, you said that racism is a mental disorder.
Yes.
I was interviewing a gentleman the other day, and I brought that up in a conversation, and he said, well, racism is not a mental disorder. He said racism is very ordered. He said that whites, Europeans, know exactly what they're doing, that racism is a political and economic convenience. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think it depends on who you're talking about. If you talk about I think of systems as having designers, as having advocates, as having players, and as having pawns. This is from game theory, and I borrowed that from Bob Williams, who analyzes systems in that way. Everybody is not a game maker or a game designer. So the game designer might be conscious of creating a racist system, whereas the advocate probably becomes unconscious. They buy into the system that was created by the designer. And so the advocate is a racist in the sense that I'm talking about it, or the dealer, those people who carry out the rules of the master in the system without really knowing why the master created the system, or even that a system was created. They just simply inherit a belief system and an action system, and in that sense, they are players in the game, but they are not the game makers. So I make a distinction.
Now break that down.
Hold it, Ms. Imogen.
Yes. Did
you go another 1 minute? Go one more minute?
Go one. Okay, sure. Yes. All right.
Go to 10 minutes and 44 seconds.
Okay. All right. Was I? Where'd it go? Hold on. Uh-oh. Man against machine.
No problem.
As I'm finding this, I couldn't help but when Dr. Hilliard was talking, thinking about today when he's talking about the delusions of grandeur and all of those other things. So I stopped at 10 minutes and, oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry.
Well, go to the wrong one.
Yeah, and while you're getting that together, remember Dr. Overton was his partner? He has a, go ahead. Here
it is. I found it. Sorry, guys. Here you go.
Sorry, go ahead.
For the person on the street one time.
Right.
Go over that again.
So there are some people who are puppets.
All right.
And there are others who are puppeteers.
Thank you. Free your mind.
Okay, you can cut it off.
Okay. Free your mind. Return to the...
Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Well,
yes.
Y'all know his partner, Dr. Overton has a 10 o'clock program on Saturday morning on YouTube over Zoom. Talks about some of the same stuff. His buddy, Asa Hilliard.
Okay. I want to touch on a subject that is probably very sensitive, and it pretty much is religion versus spirituality. I've always wondered how our ancestors dealt with, I guess, praise, worship, spirituality years ago. But I think that's something that was taken from us also. But I'd just like to get everyone else's opinion on that subject at this time, because I think it has a lot to do with where we are today. But
I'm glad you
like I
asked
said,
that question.
very
Dr.
sensitive subject, but
Dr.
I'm
Overtashaka is talking about that on Saturday at 10 o'clock on YouTube, on Zoom right now, about how we come from spirituality to Christianity. He's talking about that. He's been on now for the last 4 or 5 months.
okay.
Yeah, I got a slide. I got a slide, Milford, that's gonna about the mechanisms of culture imperialism, and Dr. Marimba Ani, she really she talks about how religion was used as a
Oh yeah.
political instrument. So yeah, we're all familiar. Yeah, religion was definitely used as a political instrument. Yes.
Sure, to get you to believe in a white Jesus.
Hey, I told you it's a sensitive subject.
I know. Hey,
but it's like,
I'm in the belly of the beast. I'm here in Alabama, so I
okay.
understand.
Well, I just wanted to comment on it because I think that was one of the main instruments that was used to keep us suppressed.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I mean, that's why I saw check Dr. Overtashaka out on Saturday morning. He has a whole series on spirituality. He went back to the Dogons and all that. That's his specialty now. He talks about it Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on YouTube and Zoom. Dr.
Okay.
Overtashaka.
All right. I tell you what, if someone, Damani, if you could send me that information, I'd really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, I get you that information, Milford.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay, I got a tape on Overtashaka. I got a slide on Overtashaka in a few minutes.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay.
And you guys are talking about money. Allen Temple has a credit union. That church, Allen Temple, has a credit union there on, I think it's International Boulevard now. And not only that, long time ago, we used to try to, in the 60s, come out of the 60s, we used to try to spend at least 45% of our net income in Black businesses. We had all that stuff going, but some kind of way we lost it as we moved on.
Right. Okay, let me run through this presentation, then we can open up for discussion. Okay, I'm just gonna read them. This is Secret War on Black People. This I couldn't find a picture of Dr. Frances West Wesson when she was younger to put at the bottom. But Secret War on Black People. We do not see the war. Culture imperialism is a war. It's a culture war. We do not see the war being waged against us because we don't want to, and because we are afraid. We are engaging in behavior designed to block out any awareness of the war, our true reality. That's Dr. Frances Cress Wesson. She was the, I know some of y'all already know, but she was the author of the ISIS papers. She was our race champion for 30 years. She passed away.
And she also helped write that book with Neely Fuller too, remember?
Right, Neely Fuller, the code book.
That's right.
And the compensatory code of, right.
Oh, and also too, while we're on it, we need to stop using that word white supremacy. Because they're not supremacist. They're not white supremacists. We taught them. But by using that word white supremacy, it put us under, saying they're the supremacists. We need to change all that stuff. Psychologically, that's what A.C. Hilliard is talking about.
Okay.
Can I address that, Damani?
Yes, yeah.
We actually had Neely Fuller Jr. Here in Sacramento, and I would encourage everyone on this Zoom to get the textbook for victims of white supremacy, the compensatory code by Neely Fuller Jr. Neely Fuller Jr. actually is Dr. Welsing's mentor.
That's right.
But the reason why he says white supremacy is because they are supreme. Yes, we have a great culture all over the world, but our position now is not supreme, and that's why he uses that term.
Right.
Okay. Let me read through the rest of these slides real fast. It's some of the mechanisms I come with of culture imperialism. Fear, bribery, coercion, control of resources, economics, Hollywood, scientific racism. They don't use scientific racism no more. They just try to attack our culture. Religion was used as a political instrument. Propaganda, public relations, and psychological warfare, all officially related. Propaganda is the overpreponderance of certain message that is designed to impose certain forms and frames of references and patterns of thought, POT, on a subject people or a targeted people. Notice military terminology. Dr. Africa would always remind us we're dealing with people who come out of a war culture. They come out of a war culture. Propaganda is used by those in power very cynically as a tool of subversion, which is the undermining or detachment of loyalties of a targeted social group and toward the transference of those loyalties to the symbols of and institutions of the dominant group. Okay, this is Obata Shaka. I didn't get a chance to get a copy of this book yet. Obata Shaka's got a book called The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, and the Choice Between Two Cultures. I watched an excellent YouTube video. It's 3 hours long. It's got Dr. Kaba, Dr. James Smalls, Dr. David Imhotep, and Dr. Obata Shaka on the Philippe Matthews show. And man, they're getting down for 3 hours. And it's all about a choice between two cultures. Let me see if I can explain it in the next couple of videos, next couple of slides. In 1967, James Baldwin predicted we're about to be hit by powerful hostile forces. In 67, we integrated. I heard Brother Kofi mention 67 a while ago. In 67, we integrated. We lost control of the education and socialization of our children. Our teachers are laid off. Black radio stations are bought out. Deindustrialization is underway. In 1976 to 1980, says Dr. Obata Shaka, we Black males lost 700,000 jobs. Black males made up 20% of the industrial workforce in this country. And because of industrialization, jobs going to Mexico and China and everywhere else, we lost 700,000 jobs. It said welfare and poverty programs breaks up around 700,000 families. Direct correlation between job loss and families broken up. He said after slavery, 100 years after slavery, we had two-parent household, 100% two-parent household. By 1980, we had 50% two-parent households. And he said around today, we're around 30% two-parent households. So in 1967, our communities are flooded with cocaine to counter the Black Panther Party and the Black Power movement. COINTELPRO is underway, decapitating, undermining, imprisoning Black leadership home and abroad. In 1967 alone, we had 159 race riots erupted across this country. Detroit, Newark, Atlanta, Boston, New York City, etc. The Kerner Commission is created in 1967. For the first time, our young people are faced with life choices different from their parents. Pressures to assimilate into a white mainstream, to step out and away from our culture was that choice. Young people are unconsciously caught between two cultures. This is a clear example of cultural imperialism because the powerful economic forces move in now. Let me keep going. This Dr. Hillard on the aftermath of the 1954 Brown decision, Brown versus Topeka Board of Education decision. In many ways, we are less whole today than were our grandparents. We didn't move from something solid to something solid. We moved away from strong cultural identity to cultural confusion. In 1954, we was invited to disperse, to disorganize, to forsake, to forget cultural identity as an antidote to segregation. The original issue among us, even today, was equity and resources and cultural democracy, the right to be culturally distinct without abuse, or the right not to. Integration solution, says Dr. Hill, seemed so reasonable at the time. We could get resources as long as we were taught in the same places as white students. So we thought. Our goal simply became the access to whatever was offered to others. Through our attempts at the goal of dispersion and disunity, we gradually began to lose the very thing that had sustained us before, a strong sense of history, culture, identity, and destiny. In other words, we opted for two-ness, the double consciousness that Dr. W.E. Du Bois described so well in his book, The Souls of Black Folks. We chose bad for and got mental bondage. Let me read this real fast. I'm gonna read the first paragraph here. This is cultural imperialism and disintegration of our social bonds. French sociologist Emile Durkheim, in his book on suicide, examined the disintegration of social bonds that drive individuals and societies to a personal and collective act of self-destruction. He realized when social bonds were strong, the individual achieved a healthy balance between number one, individual initiative, number two, self-actualization, and number three, communal solidarity, which he called a life-sustaining equilibrium. Individuals and society most susceptible to self-destruction are societies with these social bonds. This equilibrium has been shattered. And that's what they did in '67, shatter our social bonds. Societies or cultures, communities are held together by a web of social bonds. These social bonds are extended family networks, offer psychological protection from the meaningless of being isolated and alone, dependent upon one's own resources. The disintegration of these social bonds plunges individuals, like you see today in our society, into deep psychological distress, seeing all these homeless people on the streets. The above quotes are by Chris Hedges' YouTube video called Enemy, a state of helplessness and hopelessness. Oh yeah, this last one, this is my conclusion. Ultimately, ultimate culture is an instrument, this is very important. Ultimate culture is an instrument for making cooperation natural. Its success depends on the extent to which it's allowed to be self-authenticated by uniting people in a common beliefs and attitudes. Dr. Smalls points out that in '67, '68, we had an attack on the fundamental elements of the community that allowed us to provide food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security. Culture is all the things that affect your life. The dynamic aspects of your culture is your food, your health, your science, your music, your dance, your drama, all the things that inform your socialization. All the things that inform your socialization. So you can replicate your ancestral behavior patterns. It was not incidental, but deliberate policy by government, corporations, policing, and banking system, forces of imperialism, to destabilize our community. Culture is not static, but dynamic. We can always reformulate it, drawing from the very best of Black manhood and womanhood, from our collective creativities and collective struggles in all areas of human life. May each one of us represent the best of African culture daily. Now I understand when my parents said, when you leave the house, you gotta represent with dignity, not only the Sullivans, my name used to be Harry Sullivan, but the culture of African people. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a comment. My name is Kalahari Juma, and can I speak?
Go ahead.
Brother, move. Okay. What the Arabs do, this one lady I talked to said that after every study, they teach kids what happened. They teach their kids everything related to Arabs. So I don't know if we could do that or not, because sometimes I think that there would be too many chiefs and not enough Indians. At any rate, I did put my money in that bank, and the black bank went out of business, and it changed hands a couple of times. Then the Chinese got it. I also invested in a black business. I know some of y'all are from Oakland. I'm from San Francisco. Some of y'all would know the lady that I invested the money with. But I gave her $1,000, and I never heard from her again. But so that's all I want to say. That's all the notes I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Brother Kalahari. There's so much to this. What Dr. Damani Sukumu just presented to us. There's so many aspects of it. There's a lot of moving parts. I guess the main thing would be, Bob Marley wrote a song called Rastaman Live Up. And one of the lines in it, it says, keep your culture, don't be afraid of the vulture. And so we recognize that we have to get back to our historical roots to understand ourselves, to understand what we did, and then to bring that forward into 2021 and beyond. Because as we're trying to decide what to do, the system is marching ahead and to eliminate us. We mentioned Dr. Francis Welsing. We mentioned Dr. Asa Hilliard. We mentioned Neely Fuller. I'd like to just read what Dr. Welsing says that racism is. Give us kind of a working definition. We have like about 6 minutes. She says, racism, white supremacy, sorry, Kofi, is the local and global powered system and dynamic structured and maintained by persons who classify themselves as white, whether consciously or subconsciously determined, which consist of patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response as conducted simultaneously in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, for the ultimate purpose of white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation on planet Earth, a planet upon which the vast majority of people are classified as non-white, black, brown, red, and yellow by white-skinned people, and all of the non-white people are genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration compared to the genetic recessive white-skinned people. That's it. People perceive themselves as being outnumbered genetically, looking at people who are biologically able to be dominant, and they look at themselves and they see their numbers shrinking, and they say, look, hey, if we keep going like this, it won't be no white people. And so all these different things are formed. I like one of the things that Brother Damani presented with Asa Hilliard, and he's talking about the Romans. The Romans took the Jewish religion and changed it because the Jews were expecting somebody that was going to be bad, somebody that was going to fight. They were expecting somebody to come and kick the Romans out of Israel, and they took their religion and changed it and turned their teacher of righteousness into some person that said, hey, no, turn the other cheek. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was giving you accolades. That's all. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, but Milford, nice to meet you. There is a book called Caesar's Messiah by Atwell. Caesar's Messiah that gives that whole thing. So I mean, it's very complex, and Brother Damani is correct that we need to focus on keeping our culture disseminating that to our young people, explaining what happened. You know, we grew up, okay, I'm 63. So I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Something happened drastically to us in those 2 decades. And it was used to brunt our forward progress. And we need to explain that to our young people who are making videos of somebody sliding down a pole in hell to give Satan a lap dance. You know, we think that that's our young people think that that's our culture. And to a certain extent, it's not their fault, because we need to be explaining to them.
That's right.
What our culture is.
That's right.
We have about 2 minutes.
That's right.
And I'm going to go over a little bit. So let's go to 6:35 for other comments and points that people want to make. So go ahead.
So I'll jump in on this. And so I think Kofi was going to touch on this. I think what happened was by the late 1960s, we thought we got everything we wanted. And we integrated into schools. We had voting rights, et cetera, et cetera. And we ultimately forgot where our roots were. Just real quick, I think about my own neighborhood where I grew up. When I was growing up, we had my family, on my father's side, a bank that my grandfather and 4 other Black men started in the 1920s, a laundry. There was Black grocery stores, a Black funeral home, a Black dry cleaners, a Black delicatessen. And are the businesses, those were all businesses within the community that we went to on a regular basis. Right. But sadly, by the early 90s, all of those businesses were gone except for my family's bank. And by 2010, 90 years, almost 90 years to the day when the bank was started, even the bank was gone. And so I often think about this, because I'll just speak for myself and I end this. When I was leaving high school, I had a guidance counselor who suggested I go to an HBCU. And because I was young and arrogant and didn't know any better, I was thinking, well, why do you think that that's all that's available for me to go to? In retrospect, I'm sorry I didn't. I mean, I'm glad I went where I went because I met my wife. But other than that, I think I missed a tremendous opportunity. And so I think we have to have the conversation with our young folks today that taking care of ourselves is not a bad thing. Our goal should be opportunity and access. And we should not shy away from doing what other cultures do, which is take care of their own when you have to take care of your own. And I'll leave it at that. And Damani, I was 20 minutes late, so I'm sorry I missed the beginning, but I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Brother Darrell, I'm glad to see you again. Glad you could join us, and very good observations. And okay, growing up in California, we didn't have that. But you know, growing up where you all did, they had those things. And then when integration came, I was talking to an African-American mortician here in Sacramento. And he was saying that even today, the way our people view it is their ice is colder than our ice. So, right. you know, and so we really need to get out of that. One of the things that was mentioned in our discussion, and I know this about Jewish people, and I know this about Chinese people, they have a Saturday school where, okay, they go to school, you know, the whole week, but then they have a time where they focus on them. They focus on their language, they focus on their culture, and they focus on their goals that they should have. And these are things that we need to, there are places that have those. but these are things that we need to have continually.
That's why we
Because
need them independent schools.
yes, we need independent schools. But in lieu of that, Kofi, in lieu of that, we need to have, and we have a church on every corner in our communities, but we need to turn those into educational centers that we can learn about our culture, and we can learn about our history, and we can learn about our goals. So
If you could get those pastors to go along with that, because that's where your problem is going to be. One of the things that we knew, me growing up in the South, we knew that integration was not going to be the best thing for us, because we knew how white folks hated us. And we also recognized the fact that how we had been brainwashed and disliking ourselves. We knew all of that stuff. But what happened is when the movement moved out of the South and went north, that's when things began to change. That's when we started losing all our businesses and what have you. And dealing with COINTEL, when they dumped them drugs off in here in 60 and 70, they knew they were going to either co-opt us or take us off the map. And that's exactly what happened. And also too, one of the things that I like to say about the fact that used to call it well, I'm losing my thought now, but anyway, the brainwashing that we was getting, we recognized it's more like the Stockholm syndrome. That what happened is as we began to lose our identity, we took on the attributes of the ruling class. And that's the same thing the Stockholm syndrome does. When a person gets captured and the person that feeding them, they began to adopt their own way, because why? Their life depended on them. The same way we coming out of slavery, that if we wanted to eat, we had to make sure the white man fed us. And that's one thing that as men, we had no power. We had no power.
You know what? You're a lot wiser than I am, and I certainly don't mind admitting that. I would like to close with this is like my favorite quote, and I actually did a CD. It's called Authoritative Utterance, Exceptional Insight. And it's just me speaking different quotes, things from the Hosea, 2000 Seasons, etc., over music. But this is like my favorite quote, and this comes from Stolen Legacy. It's Asa Hilliard's introduction. And I think this kind of capsulizes what we're discussing. He says, mental bondage, oh God, just left.
Remember that one.
Okay, mental bondage is invisible violence.
That's right.
Formal physical slavery has ended in the United States. Mental slavery continues to this day.
That's right.
This slavery affects the minds of all people, and in one way, it is worse than physical slavery alone. That is, the person who is in mental bondage will be self-contained.
That's right.
This is the theme of Damani's presentation.
That's right.
The person that is in mental bondage will be self-contained.
Self-contained.
Not only will that person fail to challenge beliefs and patterns of thoughts which control him. This is again repeating what Marimba Ani was saying. He will defend and protect those beliefs and patterns of thought virtually with his last dying effort.
That's right.
And
remember,
so
Carter G. Woodson said something like that too, by going to the back door. So if there's not a back door, we'll make a back door.
So yes, he says that, yeah. Well, this is in the introduction to his book, Miseducation of the Negro.
Right. Yeah, I used to pass that one out.
Yeah. Brothers and sisters, it's 6:36. We've been given a lot to think about. Those of you that came in later, this presentation is being recorded, and we'll have it up on YouTube in about a week, maybe a little bit less, and you can look at it. I want to thank Brother Damani. You know, Brother Damani, as he stated, he says he's very passionate about this subject. I want to thank all the members of his family that are here, Harold and Daryl and Milford and others that are here. I'm sorry.
Oh no, Sharon and Ronald. Who else there?
Yvonne and
Yvonne. Okay. My sister Yvonne, okay.
It's a bunch of them, and we're glad that they were able to join us today. Brother Damani, why don't you close us out? What are your closing thoughts? What would you like us to close as you did a wonderful presentation?
Okay.
I just Sister Terry, that's Sister Akura. How you doing? I didn't know that was you. I didn't realize your name. I just like us to remember that the culture war we're in is between two consciousness. Like I say, an African-centered consciousness is we are a spiritually unified. We are spiritually unified whole. We are cosmic beings. We are connected with each other and the universe. The focus is on spirit and the God within, versus the other culture, which is focused on individualism, rational beings, a linear perception of reality, focused on materialism and the God outside of them. That's the culture war. And so our values today, as you see what our politicians, our Black politicians are doing, they are pushing they're pushing for righteousness, they're pushing for justice, they're pushing for fairness, they're pushing for ma'at, which us in the Mosaic Community Church, we call truth, justice, righteousness, we call it ma'at. And the other side is fighting against ma'at. They're fighting against that. So that's the war we're in. We are in a spiritual battle, and we are winning. We are winning the culture war. Dr. Linda Jeffries always reminds us we are winning. You see what happened yesterday, and there's more to come. Anyway, thank you for all showing up.
Great job.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment, please.
Yes, Mama Fua, go ahead.
Yes, I want to thank everybody that has contributed to this session. I've taken a lot of notes, and so it has really meant a lot. But I also wanted to ask what next week's session will be about.
Next week's session, so we switched. This week was supposed to be Mama Darnisha, and she wasn't able to make it this time, and so we moved Damani up a week. Next week it will be Mama Darnisha, and she'll be talking about shea butter, an economic and cultural enterprise. It's something that naturally is made from the country of Ghana, and so that's the subject next week.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And somebody just put something in the chat. They said good night. Very interesting conversation. We do this every Wednesday at 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Glad you could join us all the way from Alabama. Baba Kofi. Daryl, where are you in Maryland?
I'm in Virginia.
You're in Virginia. I may have said this. I hope I don't insult you, but my relatives are from DC, and they always said, "Don't go to Virginia." All right.
I agree with them. My wife still won't forgive me for dragging her below the Mason-Dixon line.
I'm from Texas. Hey, well, I'm originally from Maryland, but I pray that I never have to go back to Maryland or DC or Virginia.
Well, my mom is from Texas, and they're no better. All right.
Thank you, Damani.
One love to everyone. Hope to see you again. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.